All right, so why do the physicalists think they've got it all figured out? Why do they think they're right? Well, initially what they might say is, well, I've made my observations of reality, and I think there's sufficient reason to believe that physical things exist, but I haven't yet found sufficient reason to believe that non-physical things exist. Therefore, I'm going to conclude that only physical things exist. Some might even go a little bit more hardcore and say, I have not only sufficient reason to believe that physical things exist, I have sufficient reason to believe that non-physical things cannot exist, that there's somehow a logical impossibility. They might also come to us and say, look, I actually have part of my reasoning for believing that physicalism is true is what I've seen happen. And they might point to someone like Phineas Gage gets pointed to an awful lot, who was a railroad worker back in, I think, the 1830s, 40s. And he had an accident where a rod exploded and kind of went through his eye and then tore out a good chunk of his, I think it was his left frontal lobe. Anyway, he survived. Here's a picture of him right here after the event, and here's a wax figurine. Not sure why he's portrayed as smiling here, as he's got a rod in his head. But at any rate, so with Phineas Gage, the physicalist is going to say, after the event of this, after the brain injury, his personality changed. Okay, he became, in fact, I think it was, I can't remember the phrase, but people referred to him as not Gage or something like that as friends. It's like, this is a different person. And it's hard to know how much of this story is exaggerated over time, but it does seem to be the case that after surviving this injury, he not only changed in how he was able to function physically, he also changed in part because of his loss of his brain and the effect on his personality. And so a physicalist would point at that and say, see, that's an indication that our experience of ourselves is really just a physical phenomenon being generated by the brain. And they would point out that our behavior, the things that we do, these are all physical phenomenon as well. They don't originate in any kind of non-material mind. And Phineas Gage sort of proves this to us, that any individual person who behaves in a particular way is behaving that way because of the entirety of the conditions in which they exist. They're biological, psychological, and environmental conditions. That these are the things that sort of cause behavior. Think about like the behaviorists, right? They make a similar kind of argument. And so they would point to, when people engage in behavior that we don't like, the appropriate response is to recognize what's causing the behavior and then change those causes. So that if somebody is engaging in antisocial behavior, that's not necessarily the result of some character flaw in this person. It's not that they're evil or bad. It's that the totality of their environmental, biological, psychological conditions have created this behavior that we don't like. And so the response should be, rather than heaping scorn on this person, it should be to modify the biological, psychological, environmental conditions in which this person exists, and then we can change the behavior. So think like Clockwork Orange, right? We've got people that are doing things we don't like, so we're going to sort of treat them like a car engine, and we're going to re-engineer them or reprogram them through things like drugs or therapy. But we're going to change not just how they act, we're going to change who they are. We're going to change what they are in order to generate more preferable kinds of behavior. In theory, behavior we really like. Maybe it would be possible, according to physicalism, if we knew everything that there was to know about an individual person, we would be able to determine what the causes of their behavior are. And then we could, in theory at least, go in and kind of modify those causes so that it generates different kinds of behavior that we are more approving of. Now, there's some interesting questions that we would want to think about, though, here. What is the difference, then, between a robot, like Sonny here from iRobot, and a human being? What's the qualitative difference between these two things? We know that they're made of different stuff, right? Like Sonny is made of metals, and our human friend down here by the pickup is made of flesh and blood and bone and so forth. But if the physicalists are right, we would have questions about the nature of their quote-unquote experiences. So if what's happening in the human brain are physical processes only, and what's happening to generate our behavior and choices are all physical causes, then it would seem like a robot could have a similar kind of experience, right? Because the difference would be in complexity, not in kind. Because if what's generating our conscious experience of ourselves and generating our behaviors are all physical phenomenon, then it's just a matter of creating the kind of complexity in a robot that would be analogous to the kind of complexity posed in a human. Now, that's a huge technological feat, but if physicalism is true, there's no reason why that's not at least theoretically possible to do. And it raises really interesting questions about things like your phone. You know, it's processing information, or no, that's wrong. It's processing data and then giving you information. But if you increase the complexity of that ability to process, does it ever reach the stage where it's equivalent to what's going on in human beings? All right, so the physicalists, they think they've got it figured out. You need to evaluate their arguments. Keep evaluating their arguments.